All right, today we are diving into a really serious and complex topic. We're going to be decoding the laws around a tragic crime known as dowry death in India. Let's get right into it.
You know, this quote really cuts to the core of the issue, doesn't it? It frames dowry death not just as a legal problem, but as a deep, profound social failure. And it's exactly that sense of shame and urgency that pushed for the creation of some very specific, very powerful laws.
So, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll get a handle on the scope of this tragic social offense. Then, we'll decode the actual law that was written to fight it, define its most important terms, and look at how it plays out in real court cases. And finally, we'll touch on the challenges with the law and why sometimes legal action just isn't enough.
Okay, so right off the bat, it's important to understand that dowry death isn't treated like just any other crime. The law itself recognizes it as something unique, a social offense, one that's tangled up in customs and societal pressures.
Now, these legal terms might sound a bit technical, but they are absolutely crucial. Non-bailable means an accused person can't just get out on bail automatically. A judge has to decide. And cognizable? That's a big one. It means the police can arrest the suspect without a warrant and start investigating immediately. This just shows you how seriously the system is designed to take this crime from the very beginning.
So, let's get into the heart of it, the law itself. We're going to break down Section 304B of the Indian Penal Code, which is the specific law that actually defines what a dowry death is. Okay, so here's the official definition. And wow, every single phrase here is a critical piece of the puzzle that prosecutors have to assemble. You see things like unnatural causes within 7 years of marriage, and that key phrase, subjected to cruelty soon before her death. Each one is a hurdle that must be cleared.
So, what this all boils down to is 4 essential ingredients. For a conviction to stick, the prosecution has to prove every single one of these. It's not enough to show there was a suspicious death. They have to draw a direct line connecting that death to the timing, the cruelty, and a specific demand for dowry.
And that number, 7, is so important. The law draws a hard line in the sand at 7 years. If a woman's unnatural death happens even 1 day after her 7th wedding anniversary, it cannot be prosecuted as a dowry death under this specific law. It's a really strict and critical legal window.
And the punishment? Well, it absolutely reflects how serious this crime is. The minimum sentence is 7 years in prison. That's the floor, but it can go all the way up to a life sentence. This is treated as one of the most severe crimes on the books.
Okay, to really get a grip on the main law, we have to understand the 2 pillars holding it up, the legal definitions of dowry and cruelty. Because in the eyes of the law, these are not just everyday words, they have very precise meanings.
So, first, dowry. The legal definition is incredibly broad. It covers any property or valuable security. And it also includes demands made before, during, or even any time after the wedding. This wide net is there on purpose, to stop people from finding loopholes by claiming a demand wasn't technically dowry.
And cruelty, under its own section of the law, is also defined very broadly. It's not just about physical violence. It's any deliberate act, mental or physical, that's so bad it could drive a woman to suicide or cause her serious harm. And critically, it specifically calls out harassment over an unlawful demand, which of course includes dowry.
So, we've got the definitions. But how does all this theory actually play out in a courtroom? This is where we get to see how judges apply these laws to the messy details of real life.
Let's start with a really important case, Pawan Kumar versus the state of Haryana. This one's a powerful example of how the courts look at things like non-physical harassment and what actually counts as a dowry demand.
So here's what happened. A couple gets married. Soon after, the husband's family starts demanding things like a scooter and a fridge. When they don't get them, it turns into constant harassment, not just about the items, but cruel taunts about her looks. Tragically, she took her own life. The court connected all those dots and convicted the husband, finding that all 4 of those essential ingredients we talked about were there.
And here's the key takeaway from that judgment, something that became a huge precedent. The defense tried to argue that just asking for a scooter isn't a formal dowry agreement. But the Supreme Court shut that down. They said, nope, the simple act of demanding it's the crime. You don't need a formal contract. That was a game changer.
The law can also be incredibly precise. In another case, the court had to define who legally counts as a relative of the husband, since they can be charged too. And the ruling was super specific. It only means people connected by blood, adoption, or marriage.
So in that particular case, the husband's aunt's brother didn't count. It just goes to show you that the law has very clear and sometimes narrow boundaries. All right, now let's get into some of the more complex and, frankly, controversial parts of these laws. We're going to look at a pretty unique legal tool that kind of flips the script on guilt, and the debate that's been raging about whether this law gets misused.
Okay, this is a really big deal. Normally, you're innocent until proven guilty, right? Well, this law flips that on its head. If the prosecution can prove that a woman suffered dowry-related cruelty soon before she died unnaturally, the court is legally required to presume the accused is guilty. The burden of proof then shifts to the accused to prove they're innocent. It's a powerful and pretty unusual legal measure. And that power leads to a major debate. On one side, you have accusations that the cruelty law is sometimes misused as a weapon to harass innocent family members in a dispute. But on the other side, the courts have been pretty consistent. They've basically said that just because a law could be misused doesn't make it a bad law, especially when it's necessary to protect women from very real, very dangerous situations.
This all brings us to a really critical point. We have this robust legal framework, but it doesn't exist in a bubble. In this last section, let's explore why these powerful laws haven't been enough to completely stamp out the problem.
And this is where we come full circle. Our source material is very clear. Even with a specific crime of dowry death on the books and the threat of life in prison, the underlying custom of giving and taking dowry is still going strong in many parts of society.
And the reasons why are complex and deeply social. You've got these deep-rooted ideas of tradition and status. In some places, there's a lack of awareness that these laws even exist. You've got immense family pressure on women to just compromise and stay quiet, and then there's the huge social stigma that can come with speaking out against your own family.
Which leaves us with this final, really challenging question. We've seen that having strong laws is a critical tool, but it's obvious they can't do the job all on their own. So, what else does it take? What does it really take for a whole society to finally change a tradition that's so deeply ingrained, yet so incredibly destructive?